One Health is a collaborative effort of multiple disciplines, working locally, nationally, and globally to attain optimal health for people, animals, and the environment.
In confidence, it means a roadway to so many other constraints for any community.
Its adaptation, advanced water treatment plant distribution system, or wastewater control are good adapting methods.
It can also be this more kind of political, economic. It's just you have water, but it's not safe.
Water crisis, water deficit that is not just due to the depletion of natural water resources, but also due to insufficient funds that are allocated to the management of water resources.
According to the United Nations, water scarcity is the point at which the aggregate impact of all users impinges on the supply or quality of water, to the extent that the demand by all sectors, including the environment, cannot be satisfied fully.
So, how can water scarcity and One Health be related? Since water is vital for proper body functions, one must somehow consume water every day. If water cannot be consumed in its natural form due to the fact that it is deemed unclean or inaccessible, then it must be consumed other ways. The first way is through food. The best sources of water-rich food are fruits and vegetables, which should be ideally be washed before consumption. Still, these foods can also be affected if the water being used to water crops is contaminated, thus indicating that water contamination plays a big role in the life of not only humans but also the environment. Animals are also affected by water contamination as they also consume water and may develop a disease if they ingest contaminated water. These affected animals will again not only affect themselves but also the people who consume them, introducing diseases to affected communities. A second way to consume water is through drinks. Water scarcity in communities has created a dependency on bottled water and encouraged the consumption of cola-based beverages, affecting both the environmental and physical health of the people. Since synthetic plastics are not biodegradable, it just sits in landfills and pollutes the environment. In addition, the consumption of sodas can lead to the health problems such as diabetes, heart disease, and obesity.
While developing a plan for water scarcity in Canada's Indigenous communities, a pattern emerged. An abundance of resources, studies, reports, and policies exist explaining changes that should be implemented along with their desired effects. However, where these documents failed was in their idea that water scarcity in Indigenous communities could be re-established by viewing the problem as a linear process and simply fixing the break in the path. In contrast to a linear algorithm, circles and webs are recurring symbols in the Indigenous worldview. One of the best-known examples are talking circles, which represent interconnectedness, equality, and continuity. Taking this concept of circles and webs into consideration, the One Health Water Security Web for Indigenous communities was designed. It begins with 3 steps that should be completed in the order they are presented to ensure the health and safety of residents living on the reserve are maintained. The following steps can be completed in any order, hence the concept of a web. Let's start by examining the 3-step process to establish short-term water security on reserves. First, the acknowledgement and acceptance of the problem. Step 2. Effective communication and coordination amongst relevant groups. So the first group we need to establish is the team. The most effective team would ideally consist of at least one representative from the affected Indigenous community, a member from the local government, a member from the provincial government, and a member from the federal government, who are consistently able to meet to discuss developments in their case. There are no formal criteria for choosing these representatives. However, dedication and passion for the betterment of quality of life for the residents, knowledge of the environment, and awareness of Indigenous cultures and traditions would be valuable assets. And step 3 of our short-term plan is the pursuit of culturally acceptable short-term water sources. The subsequent 6 steps can be completed in a web-like fashion. As one task has been completed, it may also spur growth or inspiration in another area, much like how a talking circle generates ideas in multiple areas at once. Therefore, each community will cycle through the steps in a different order. Let's start with source water protection. Source water protection, or SWP, is the first step in the formal 5-step approach to water treatment known as the multi-barrier approach. It aims to reduce the risk of waterborne contamination introduced by the water source. It is more cost-effective to protect the water from contamination in the first place than remediating the water after contamination. The next factor in our web is water distribution, which should be assessed on a case-by-case basis. Trucks are the primary means of water distribution and a major source of recontamination after leaving the water treatment facility. The most logical solution to this problem would be to develop a regular truck cleaning system and schedule. Creating a new job and hiring someone would introduce more money into the community's economy, but it would likely require the local or provincial government to sponsor the position. This would be an excellent opportunity for local and provincial governments to work in collaboration with the reserves to reestablish a positive business relationship. As the trucks become cleaner, trust will be restored in the water supply, allowing residents to move away from bottled water. Next up, mental health support. Indigenous women are likely to be at the highest risk of mental illness due to their sacred connection to water. They may feel it is their duty to protect their family and blame themselves if loved ones become sick. Socioeconomic status will also play a role and contribute to the stigma separating Canada's Indigenous people from the rest of the population. In an ideal world, this stigma would not exist. However, we recognize that the Indigenous people are a unique group with a distinct history from the rest of Canada and desire to remain a separate entity with autonomy. Our recommendation is that the team establish a mental health support group on the reserve, which could provide services related, but not limited to, depression, anxiety, budgeting strategies, suicide prevention, or addiction. Within these mental health support groups, Indigenous people would be able to talk with each other, make connection, and realize that they are not alone in their struggles. The physical health consultation is another important aspect. Upon examination of news reports, one of the biggest concerns and complaints from residents was of skin rashes. The team should locate a dermatologist knowledgeable in the concerns of the residents and who is available to visit regularly. Other professionals to consider reaching out to should be gastroenterologists and dietitians. Speaking of dietitians, nutritional counseling should also be a priority. The long-term consequences of water bottles containing BPA, a compound used for creating hard, durable plastic, should be assessed. Water is also available through vegetables and fruits. This would best be accomplished by bringing in a dietitian to hold a question and answer period specifically related to dietary meal planning specific to the reserve's circumstances. It has been found that those living on reserves tend to consume diets higher in processed sugars from soda. Diets high in sugar and lower in micronutrients found in fresh fruits and vegetables greatly increases one's risk of developing chronic diseases such as type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and certain types of cancer. Lastly, to ensure the knowledge and importance of water is passed on to future generations, changes to the education system should be implemented. This could include the elders teaching about the spiritual meaning of water and using talking circles. The team could visit the school, talk about current water status in the community, and engage students in project planning. Members of the mental health support group could focus on fostering friendships between students. Children are resilient and can act as support systems for each other during difficult times. One small change can trigger a major improvement, and that's what we hope the One Health Water Security Web for Indigenous communities will accomplish.
But in some areas, they pay $30 for 1 barrel of water from the donkey carts that come by with water from the water sources. So you pay that amount for a barrel.
So water scarcity in Mauritania is associated with a social stigma. This is because poor access to water is actually leads to poor hygiene, and this makes it hard for people from Mauritania to integrate in other communities, like in other communities in Mali or other neighboring countries, because they think that they have a poor hygiene. And this does not only it's not only associated with that, but it also reduces their self-esteem and their acceptability. Um, 2,150 people in Mauritania die of diarrhea. 90% of these deaths are actually associated with poor water quality, sanitation, and hygiene. Also, the lack of better water distribution systems and sewage system leads to stagnant water surface. This leads to poor sanitation and uneasy transmission of diseases, e.g., malaria. Limited water consumption actually yields to high rates of dehydration in addition to many waterborne diseases. Water is expensive in Mauritania. 100 liters of water is between 80 cents and $1.6, and the average income family in Mauritania is $1. So this poses a big challenge to the family. Another thing is that groundwater depletion leads to saltwater intrusion. So when groundwater becomes salty and brackish, it's no longer good for use by humans, wildlife, and plants. And plants will no longer have enough water for their nutrients, and people or animals who depend on those plants will actually have hunger because they don't have enough food to consume.
The next reason is unshaped water distribution system and sewage system. Unshaped water distribution system means no tap water for rural people. More than 50% of people in Mauritania live in rural districts. Therefore, they have to collect water from distant places or buy water from vendors. The long-distance transportation may cause infection of bacteria, which will contaminate the water. And also, undeveloped sewage systems means no universal way to dispose the human waste. Sewage is often left on the ground. This is also a potential contamination to the ground water quality. Poor education also worsens the water crisis in Mauritania. Nowadays, 37.4% of male and 58.4% of female are uneducated people. Because of lack of awareness of basic hygiene and the common knowledge of water quality, they will contaminate water unconsciously. Because of the political instability and corruption, the regional economic are mismanaged. Urban people usually will have enough funding for water quality and economic growth. However, the rural areas will face a bigger water scarcity problem and economic problem because of poor allocation of government funds and minimal infrastructures, which means less economic opportunities for rural people and affects their water usage.
The suggestions and solutions that Group C has come up with for Mauritania. The first point is the education. We've discussed that Mauritania is a country that has an imbalance in education in a way that the boys, at least men, are more well educated and usually more well off than the women and the girls. In usually most communities, the girls are kept at home to help with water, to fetch water from distant water sources. And we believe this is another reason why the current situation with water in the country is not improving as they might want it. So we want to promote education for the girls in the rural communities and for the women as well. in a way that, like, training them on simple water treatment at home for the sources they might be using, like the surface streams and the lakes, and sometimes the groundwater that they use can also not be as clean as they think. So educating them on those aspects and giving them simple assistance on how to treat water at home using home charcoal from fire, the sand, the small pebbles to clean the water from those surfaces, and also in teaching them on how to maximize the use of water sources like the rainwater to be able to harvest water for their families with the little rain they have every year. Even though this rainwater and some of the streams and lakes can't be used for drinking, they can actually use this water for farming, for gardening, in a way that will reduce the dependence on water for other needs. So the other aspect was to minimize the dependence and pressure on the groundwater that most of the rural communities depend on for their drinking purposes, and most of the cooking purposes is depleting, and to an extent that some people have realized it in the water, the taste of the water. This is from a few interviews with some Mauritanians in the Gambia, that in some rural communities the water is salty, and in the areas where the pipelines and the tap water runs from the Senegal River, that water is better and it doesn't taste salty. So, and in the rural communities, the water source is usually wells and the groundwater that they use. So if it is salty, that is a sign that there is a bit of depletion, if not an extensive one. So the education on this is to let the population know, especially those in the rural communities, that this is a situation that is not a simple one, and it could be very, very detrimental to all other aspects of the society. And the second aspect is the family planning, that the country is experiencing a very rapid increase in the population, especially with the Kabra city, which used to be a very small town and now has expanded beyond Mezo with the insurgence of refugees from Mali, and also from the uncontrolled family fertility rates in the population. So it's our suggestion that family planning in Mauritania would in somehow suppress or reduce the pressure, the recent and current pressure on the depleting resource, and in one way or the other also help them to maintain and preserve the little amount of water that they have in their ground water. And third one is water treatment, water security initiatives and investments. For a country like Mauritania, water scarcity was not an issue of just recent years. It has been there for a long time, and through our research, we've come across aspects where it is very evident that the economy and the government has not put so much or enough steps and actions towards this problem in order to be able to move to a different level with the current water situation. So we believe if there is an empowerment for the citizens and the population, this will help them to make better choices with their leaders, with their economy, in order to leave spaces for initiatives and investment for their water resource, to be able to help them deal with any future predictions for their water. And the empowerment of citizens to take active responsibilities and roles in water scarcity actions,